Imagine a company so powerful it had its own army, its own currency, and the legal right to execute people. That sounds like science fiction, but in 1602, it was real. Its name was the VOC, the Dutch East India Company. Today, we call companies like Google, Apple, and Amazon innovators. But in truth, they're following a blueprint that's more than 400 years old. This is the story of how the 17th century's spice routes became the 21st century AI infrastructure, and why the logic of the world's first global empire still shapes our lives today. To understand this, we have to go back to the late 1500s. At the time, Portugal ruled the spice trade, not because they had the biggest fleet, but because they controlled information. They possessed secret navigation manuals called Roteiro. To the Portuguese king, these maps were more valuable than gold. Leaking them was considered treason, punishable by death. Then came an unlikely disruptor, a low-ranking clerk named Jan Huygen van Linschoten. While working in Goa, India, he quietly did something revolutionary. For years, he secretly copied the Portuguese shipping logs, routes, winds, ports, distances, everything. When he returned to the Netherlands, he published it all in a book called Itinerario in 1596, and overnight, the world changed. The myth of Portuguese invincibility collapsed. Suddenly, anyone could sail to the Spice Islands. What had once been a tightly guarded monopoly became public knowledge. It was the world's first open-source revolution, and it revealed a rule that still governs global power today. Whoever owns the map owns the market. So why did people actually risk their lives for a handful of pepper? The history books usually give us the same answer. In the 17th century, there were no fridges. They needed spice to cover up the taste of rotting meat. Okay, that's true. But let's be real. Would you sail into deadly storms and risk dying of scurvy just for a better-tasting steak? That explanation underestimates human greed. The real reason people went crazy for pepper wasn't because it was an ingredient. It was because pepper was an asset. Back then, they called it black gold, and that wasn't just poetry. Pepper was literally edible cash. Think about it. Gold coins were heavy and scarce, but pepper? It was lightweight, it didn't rot, it was easy to divide, and it was accepted across every single border in Europe. It was the Bitcoin of the 1600s, a high-density cross-border currency. The 17th century looked very different from today. Landlords demanded rent in sacks of spice. Governments collected taxes in pepper. Even dowries and court fines were paid in peppercorns. It wasn't legal tender printed by a bank, but it was the money the market trusted most. That fever sweeping across Europe, it wasn't a culinary passion, it was speculative mania. People weren't chasing flavor, they were sailing across the world to hunt down the ultimate liquid asset. So Linschoten's stolen maps were out in the wild, and what happened next? A gold rush, or rather a black gold rush. Dozens of small Dutch firms, the VOC company, raced to Indonesia with stars in their eyes. But instead of getting rich, they walked straight into an economic slaughterhouse. Here's the nightmare scenario. Because so many Dutch ships arrived at the same Indonesian ports at the same time, the local spice lords just laughed and jacked up the prices. It was a bidding war against their own countrymen. Then, when those same ships returned to Europe, the market was flooded. Supply skyrocketed and prices crashed. This was the double squeeze. High costs at the source, low profits at home. It was economic suicide on a national scale. The Dutch government saw the disaster unfolding and issued a brutal ultimatum. Stop killing each other or lose everything. Merge, now. In 1602, the VOC was born. It stands for Verenigde Oost-Indische Compagnie, better known as the Dutch East India Company. But this wasn't just a merger, it was the creation of a corporate Frankenstein. The government gave them a 21-year monopoly and something unheard of, sovereignty. Now, to be clear, the VOC didn't just seize this power. They operated under delegated sovereignty. The Dutch Republic handed them a formal charter authorizing them to act as an agent of the state where the government couldn't reach. This made the VOC historically unique. It wasn't a country, but a corporation authorized to act like one, raising armies, minting coins, and even carrying out executions. They ended the internal price war to start a global war for dominance. They didn't just want to participate in the market, they wanted to be the market. Does this sound familiar? This is the exact blueprint big tech uses today. We see it when governments delegate strategic authority to defense contractors, infrastructure giants, or platform regulators. The VOC was simply the first and most extreme example of a private entity wielding the sword of a nation. Before Google or Amazon ever existed, the VOC had already mastered the art of the insurmountable moat. But the monster needed more fuel. Originally, investors expected their money back after every voyage, but in 1612, the board of directors, known as the 17 Committee, Heeren XVII, pulled off the ultimate betrayal. They realized if they returned the capital, the company would shrink and lose to competitors, so they simply said, no. They refused to pay back the investors and invented permanent capital. This betrayal forced investors to sell their ownership to others, creating the Amsterdam Stock Exchange. The company kept the cash to build more ships and more forts. This became the world's first exponential growth engine, the flywheel.
Now, fast forward 400 years. One man would replicate this ruthless 1612 strategy to absolute perfection: Jeff Bezos. Bezos is obsessed with a philosophy he calls Day One. It means that no matter how big a company gets, it must act like a hungry startup on its very first day, always innovating, never settling. To Bezos, the moment you enter Day Two, you begin a slow death of stagnation. So what did he actually do? Just like the VOC leaders in 1612, Bezos completely ignored the screams from Wall Street for short-term dividends. Instead of paying out profits to shareholders, he plowed every single dollar back into the business, building massive warehouses, global logistics, and AWS, Amazon Web Services. Today, AWS isn't just a cloud product, it's a digital fortress. It is the digital port that half of the internet must pass through just to survive. Bezos understood the ancient secret. By owning the infrastructure of everything, you build an insurmountable moat. Before Amazon was even a thought, the VOC had already mastered this art. Bezos simply took their 400-year-old blueprint and built a digital empire with it. But Amazon isn't the only one following the Dutch blueprint. In 2004, when Google went public, they didn't just walk into Wall Street, they staged a revolution. They used a Dutch auction, a method born in 17th century tulip markets, to let the public decide their price, essentially bypassing the traditional power of the banking elites. But here's the real kicker. Through dual-class shares, Google's founders kept the ultimate power. This is the 17 Committee model all over again. Like the 17 lords of the VOC, Google's leadership can tune out the shareholder noise and focus on 20-year missions like AI. Think about it. In 1612, when the VOC refused to return capital, it wasn't a scam, it was a strategic pivot. They realized that short-term satisfaction equals long-term weakness. They chose to build a global empire instead of a local shop. Google and Amazon are doing the exact same thing. These aren't just business decisions, they are structural shifts. From short-term trade to long-term empire, from shareholder primacy to founder control, from extracting profit to accumulating the very infrastructure of our lives. They take your money to build their world, but they never, ever give you the steering wheel. Before Amazon or Google were even a thought, the VOC had already mastered this art. Modern tech giants are simply the new flags flying over the same old, indestructible fortress. Let me ask you a question. Why did Nokia, the undisputed king of mobile, fall so hard? The answer is simple. Nokia was selling a product, but Steve Jobs was building an empire. When Steve Jobs launched the App Store, he didn't just open a software shop, he built a modern-day digital port. Every developer sailing through this port must pay a 30% tax on their sales. Does this sound familiar? It's the exact same blueprint the VOC used 400 years ago when they seized the Strait of Malacca, charging a toll to every ship that dared to pass through. And Elon Musk is reading from the same playbook. Look at Tesla's massive supercharger network. Now, other car brands are bowing down, forced to use Tesla's infrastructure just to keep their vehicles moving. These giants all realized one universal truth. Products change, but the choke points remain forever. Yesterday, it was peppercorns and sailing ships. Today, it's data and electric vehicles. By owning the infrastructure, these companies ensure they stay the masters of the route, no matter which way the wind blows. Remember this: if you don't own the road, you are just a traveler paying tolls. The message the VOC sent when they dominated the Indonesian seas is still alive today. He who owns the path owns everything. By now, you're probably wondering, is the company I've invested in actually the next VOC? To find out, I'm pulling back the curtain on a 400-year-old blueprint for empire building. Here are the 5 filters to identify a corporate empire. 1. The map filter. In the 17th century, it was the Roteiro, the stolen maritime logs. Today, it's proprietary data and algorithms. Companies like Google and Meta don't just observe the market, they draw the map of human desire and behavior. He who draws the map never loses his way. 2. The capital filter. Are you looking for a company that pays fat dividends? Then forget about building an empire. A true empire, like the 17 Committee of 1612, ruthlessly rejects short-term profits. Look for a day-one reinvestment machine, a flywheel that plows every dollar back into ships and forts. That is where the uncatchable speed comes from. 3. The fortress filter. An empire must own its own infrastructure and ecosystem. The App Store, AWS, and superchargers, these are modern-day maritime forts. If users and developers are locked into an ecosystem where they must pay a tax just to exist, you're looking at a fortress. 4. The governance filter. The VOC had the 17 Committee, who could ignore the screams of angry shareholders. The modern version? Dual-class shares. Can the founder ignore the shareholder noise to focus on a 20-year mission like AI? Without this independence, the brutal, long-term decisions required for empire building are impossible. 5. The density filter. Finally, look at what's accumulating in their vaults. Pepper was once the high-density asset used as currency because it held immense value in a small package. Today, it's silicon chips and AI models. He who controls the rarest, most valuable resource of the era rules the world. If a company passes all 5 of these filters, be careful. They aren't just a business. They are the descendants of the VOC, reborn in the 21st century. The only question left is, are you a citizen of that empire or just a traveler paying tolls at the gate? See you in the next video.